Welcome back to the last Civilnet podcast episode of the year 2024. I'm actually delighted to be joined by repeat guest, friend of the show, and political commentator, Mr. Eric Hacopian. Eric, thanks for joining us again.
It's a pleasure.
So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be closing up the year. We're going to take a look at what happened in Armenia over the last 365 days. What are the impacts? What movements in the broader region are impacting Armenia directly? Let's start from the economic side of things, because that's what I'm usually pretty excited about. Let's review the year. The growth has been a little bit less than stellar in the last couple of years compared to the last year, but there still has been. I think it's 5.5% growth, something like that. So unpack this for us. What does this mean for Armenia?
I think the growth numbers I saw was 5.6% for the year, which is, we have, at this point, we have 30 years of data when it comes to the Armenian economy. And over the past 30 years, since essentially the post-First War, after the end of the First War, except for the few first years of Sarkisian, which was essentially at the same time as the 2008 worldwide recession, Armenia has had pretty much, on average, a growth above 5%. So there's a consistent pattern here. The normal growth rate in this country is in the 5 to 6% range, regardless of time frame or regime or government. What we had was essentially 2 years of super growth, which was actually driven by what was going on in Russia, mass movements of people and money into Armenia. But that was a short-term gain that essentially has, dissipated and has gone back to the norm. However, there are effects of this thing that are going to go on. It's if you look at I would call the carry trade, in which goods come here and then they get re-exported to Russia. That's about in the 7 billion range. And if you actually talk to people who are in business, the normal margin is between 15 to 20%. So that's essentially $1 billion that stays in this country from that trade, which is not insignificant. It's almost like 4% of GDP. And frankly, that's not going to go away because sanctions are not likely to go away. The history of Western sanctions is once they're in place, they don't really leave until there's regime change, and no one knows when that would ever happen in Russia. So, and if you actually look at economic history, the Dubai that everyone is so impressed by today actually started as doing the same thing for Iran after the 79 revolution. There was actually the genesis of Dubai. It was actually doing the carry trade with Iran, which actually still goes on.
Wasn't it gold and diamonds?
Yeah. So I think there's an element of we've gone back to normal, but the normal growth of 5 to 6% still means you essentially double the size of your economy in 15 years. Growth in the 10% range means that you double the size of your economy in 7 years. But outside of China, in the post-Deng period, I'm not even sure how reliable those numbers are. No one has ever been able to keep double-digit growth for that long. So we're essentially gone back to normal. If you look at it, economic growth here is driven by a couple of factors, some of them that are missed. One of them is obviously IT, because I think the IT exports were actually undercounted. There's estimates that are coming out that's close to 2 billion, and almost all of that is exports. And the other part of it is essentially pump priming internally from just a massive increase in government spending, infrastructure, and other things. The Armenia state budget was in the 2 to 3 billion range in 5-6 years ago. Now it's close to, with capital expenditures, between 8 to 9 billion. And outside of the money that goes for foreign military purchases, almost all of that is essentially being invested into the economy, and by adding essentially drums and demand into the economy, that's going to keep it's a significant amount of outlays that actually keeps the economic growth going, which is the growth of IT, the growth of other businesses, which have also been consistent, plus with a massive, significant amounts of government spending. It means that this level of growth is likely to be sustainable in the 5 to 6% range and the norm, because we've really had it for the past 30 years, and I don't see a reason why it should change. Even there's actually better reasons for it to change upwards rather than downwards.
Yeah, I just think what's important is to make sure that these changes are sustainable. And to be entirely fair, like, the years of supposed explosive growth under Kocharyan was really just, I mean, it came down to massive spending on infrastructure projects like North Avenue and so on, most of which ended up being a big money laundering scheme. And if we're calling that out, we should also call out the fact that, hey, like, is this actually going to be sustainable, or is the current administration's claim to fame, the economic growth, just due to Russian re-export? Are we building something sustainable? Now, of course, you have, Service Titan that they just went public. They're now a $10 billion company, and they've employed something like 2,000 people here.
No, not that many. It's less than that. It's 2,000 worldwide.
Overall, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we do have, we don't have the exact numbers yet, but a couple millionaires in this country overnight, and legitimate millionaires, not people who did it by stealing. So we'll see the reverberations of that in the coming year or so, what they'll do with that money and so on. But I guess the concern is just, is this growth sustainable, or is this just fudging the numbers?
No, it's again, there's elements of growth in all periods that are suspects, and there's elements of growth that are just natural and they happen. And part of the growth that we've had over the last few years is sort of catch-up growth. That if you had a non-monopolized economy, we would have had this growth 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I'm optimistic in keeping a consistent mid-level growth because, again, there's a track record of that. Now, some of it is going to be on fluff, but like the re-exports. But if the re-exports are going to happen for the next 20 years, that's not fluff. That's just a basic fact of what goes on economically in the region.
Yeah, we do also have like a lot of the EU and US money that's been pouring in to build out infrastructure that does in fact lead to real growth, right? The whole north-south highway project, stuff that's going to slash export times and so on, which will also bring some valuable currency into Armenia.
I mean, infrastructure historically, not only does it create jobs, it also creates the economic conditions for future economic growth and job creation. That's consistent around the world and doesn't change from place to place.
What do you think of our current dram valuation? How much does that have the part to play in all this?
Well, I mean, it makes the job of exporters a lot harder because our exports in many instances have become uncompetitive. At the same time, you have that purchasing power that comes from a stronger dram has actually raised the capacity of local consumers to actually, buy more things that we produce or import, depending on the case. So we all know that the dram would be even more valued if it was not for interference by the central bank that routinely buys dollars off the market to essentially keep dram in that 400 range. The fact that the dram is essentially between 390 and 400 for the last 2 years means that there's consistent interference by the central bank, and I don't think they will allow it to go under 390. Because that will essentially hurt the IT industry, which is the goose that lays the golden egg. So they will not. I don't see any dram going down under 390. Circumstances change. You could see some devaluation, but currency in Armenia against the dollar has been frankly very consistent. Actually, if you look at charts over the last 15 years, I believe it was, there's only 2 currencies in the world that have gained against the dollar. It's the Swiss franc and the Armenian dram. So I think the currency issue is going to stay the same. But interestingly enough, that's generally a problem around the world because most people are concerned about devaluation of the currency. And fortunately, in this case, we're actually worried about the reverse.
Let's switch gears. Let's move a little bit into politics, which is more your bread and butter than mine. Where do you see the trends going based on the last year, moving into 2025 with this current government?
Well, I mean, we're in the last year before. This is the last full year of this government. We're going to have elections in 26, and he can call it the end of this year if he really wants. This is the prime minister, that is. Most likely, we're looking at elections in the spring of 26. The sad thing is that nothing has really changed in the sense that you have a government that is far less popular than it was before, with an opposition at least a formal opposition that is just as unpopular as it ever was before.
If not more so. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, we are.
You have the most recent IRI polls. Kocharian had a significant. He was at like 14% the last time they'd done one, and this time he was at 2% in terms of trustworthiness by the people.
Yeah, I mean there's a 1/3 base in this country that is with this prime minister no matter what, and there's a 1/3 consistent base who hates him no matter what.
Yeah.
And that 1/3 base who hates him will be they'll vote for the opposition, whatever that is. What is missing, and we still don't have, which is what we've hoped for always, which is to have a third force, which is reformist, but not this government, sort of a technocratic, competent type, party or parties or political forces. And after 5 years after the war, we still don't have that. And I'm afraid we don't have it because we might not have the political capacity to create it, that the body politic doesn't really create that kind of individuals, or those kinds of people, frankly, need to come out of the business sector. And the issue is who's willing to make that sacrifice in the business sector when you're doing well and you're making money to leap into politics, which is not a very good career trade-off. So I'm afraid that we might be going into the next elections essentially the same way we went into the elections in 2021, in which the only difference being that this current government would be even less credible than it was before. But if there's no opposition to it, they could win an election with, significant margins, which in real terms they don't deserve.
So it's also tragic to think of, Armenia's third, hopefully free and fair election as essentially a waste of time and taxpayer money, right? We want it to be somewhat competitive.
Well, it's too soon to say. I mean, and the things, we're going into a very tumultuous year. 1,000 things can happen. We could have war. We could have, things can change on a dime. Yeah. We don't know. We can only say at this moment what we see is what I outlined. But politics is full of unexpected turns and surprises. So we could be, some person can come out of somewhere and they catch fire. Nowadays, frankly, with social media technology and other things, it is so easy for one outlier to become exceptionally popular very quickly. So we're not saying, I'm hoping that's not the case. I just fear that that's what the case from what we see today.
But are we not seeing at least the beginnings of, I would say even a more, I don't want to use the word competent because I don't actually know this, but at least somewhat competitive new opposition movement forming in the Babajanyans and Aram Sarkisians and the Khurshudjans, the ones who organized this EU referendum where they wanted 50,000 votes, they got 63,000 signatures, yeah, in order to discuss, this is for context, in order to discuss in the National Assembly the possibility of Armenia's Euro aspiration. So you are seeing them kind of start to get organized. They were able to achieve a small win, a symbolic win, but something tangible.
But in real terms, those people are not the opposition. I mean, they are not part of the ruling coalition, but they're not really opposing the current government. So calling them an opposition is an exaggeration. Calling them another force is more honest. I mean, listen, if you look at the polling, the profile is there. Yeah. If you are pro-revolution, as far as the results of it, anti-old regime, pro-Western, pro-business, or while being very critical of this government on matters of foreign policy or on matters of competence, there's an easy market for you to get 25-30% of the votes. Yeah. Because this government's base has been reduced to older, poor, and rural. They're going to, even in the next election, they're going to underperform in the big cities and definitely in Yerevan. So that shine is off. The problem is that no one has been able to pull those people that were former this government supporters into a collective political force. And they will not vote for whatever's left of the old opposition.
What about within the party itself? I mean, we're always wondering in terms of succession. Is there anyone? I mean, the prime minister has this tendency, of course, to make sure that nobody outshines him, which is a very common political thing to do. But is there anyone that you, at least in your opinion, do you see as some kind of potential, even if they don't want to do it, but some kind of potential successor, somebody who's one or two people who stand out, who are interesting and can potentially be a compelling liberal, Western, pro-militarization, pro-business candidate within the party?
It's hard to say. I mean, there's obviously different political factions, and they would cut each other's throats the moment that opportunity comes. In many cases, they cut each other's throats now.
Yeah, they still.
To shine in front of their own leader. We're going into uncharted waters. You're talking about a political transition in Armenia within a party. That's not something that has ever happened before. And the way these things usually work is it's the name that you least expect that will become the person and not the person that everybody thinks it is. If, for example, if you go within the confines of the current party, the only names that can be in any way be considered would be someone like Arad Mirzoyan, who would be somewhat of a natural because of his own party history. It would be Lilit Makuns, Armen Grigorian, even though he's really not a party person. And it'll be one or two other names. But if I was to guess, most likely, if you have if you have like a non-controversial transfer, at some point the prime minister will choose a successor within the party. Yeah. And walk away. But I don't see that in the short run.
Yeah. And in 2026.
Yeah. And then there's names that, and this is like, it's a parliamentary system in England. If that happens, you'll have it's not the country that'll be choosing the leader. It'll be a couple of hundred people who will get together and choose the leader in the same way like the Conservative Party chose. It's multiple prime ministers without an election. So, those are the only names that are in any way realistic. I just don't see that in the short run.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Makuns because I remember both you and I were quite dismissive of her in the beginning when she was appointed, and I really feel like she's punched above her weight, and it's also helpful that she's kind of not involved in the nitty-gritty of Armenian politics over here because she's busy in the United States. Anyway, I'm hoping for the best as usual. Let's switch gears and talk about, I think, what's on the majority of our viewers' minds here. Let's talk about military and defense. This is something that everybody's constantly worried about. So what have we seen? What are some of the major wins that we've seen in the last year? What are some of the trends that we're looking at? And what are you afraid of in 2025? To give you a little hardball question.
We've seen a continual buildup in weapons purchases. That's been consistent, and it's good to see. And most of it is on a high level. We have seen military reforms happening on a much slower scale than we would like. Yeah. But they are happening. They're just not happening fast enough for anyone's liking because the institution itself is so hard to change. Finally, we've gotten rid of the foreign interference in it, which is a big plus. So I think when it comes to hardware, it's good. When it comes to software, it still, needs dramatically a lot more work. When it comes to essentially infrastructure and defending the country, we've actually made significant strides with that. I mean, me and you were, along with many other journalists, were on a trip. But we saw some of the things that are being built. We're not going to go into the details, but we are upgrading the infrastructure capacity of this country to defend itself, and that's happening at a rapid pace, and it's going to continue happening. So good things are happening on defense. They're simply not happening as fast as we would like it to happen. And we're at, in some ways, the most dangerous period because that the capacity that the other side has to do things at will is disappearing. Which obviously brings up the temptation is you need to act before that privilege that they have disappears. So we're at a dangerous period in that sense. So 2025, anything can happen, and it'll be partly based on the international situation of how out of control the region gets.
Yeah, we're definitely we're not naked and afraid anymore, but we're also not out of the cold just yet. And, it's important to stay vigilant.
Not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of X factor should we be looking out for in particular in world events that could be either beneficial or dangerous for us?
The most important X factor over the next year, and in fact a year or two, is energy prices, oil and gas prices specifically. Based on, there's a war premium that's there because of the war in Ukraine and because of instability in the Middle East. There's a chance that the war in Ukraine ends this year, somehow. And if that happens, that's going to take away some of the premium. But then again, you can have similar instability or wars in the Middle East that can actually bring back that price premium. We could have a worldwide recession. Chinese economy is in trouble. Some of Trump's
trade war
things can actually trigger a worldwide recession.
Yep.
And then any kind of economic downturn kills energy prices, specifically oil prices, which are very price sensitive to demand. But the biggest, the tsunami that's heading our way is actually on natural gas, because right now natural gas prices are lower than they were prior to the Ukraine war. And because of diversification from Russia, there's actually massive amounts of natural gas projects that are coming online, most of them LNG, post 25 to 28, which are going to create an oversupply situation for a long time. And who knows if the war ends in Ukraine, and for example, the AfD is part of the ruling coalition in Germany, they could be buying Russian gas in a year. Nobody knows. But we're probably heading into a lower energy price environment simply because of the oversupply. And that could be triggered into a collapse in prices, or it could be something where you have a more natural decline. But given the fact that three of the that our southern neighbor Iran, our northern giant Russia, and our adversary essentially have economies that are greatly affected or entirely run on selling energy resources, any kind of a mass disruption or a collapse in prices probably makes things more dangerous in the short run, or makes them more aggressive to try to solve internal problems, specifically our neighbor. But again, there's other, in the long term, it weakens all of these countries. But in the short run, it definitely could make the regime in Baku more dangerous, because we've seen there's been a tendency there's between decline in prices and aggression. But that's not the only qualifier, and that wasn't the only reason for those aggressions. So if there's an X factor, it's energy prices. We need to watch energy prices very carefully.
Yeah, it's like the kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because they're like, on the one hand, lower prices are great because they can't keep buying sophisticated equipment to use against us, but it also turns up the urgency of them to do something with what they already have. So either way, it's not fun for us, and hopefully whoever's watching this is keeping us at the ready.
Yep.
Let's talk about foreign policy a little bit. It is a tumultuous period. It's almost like this domino effect of all kinds of stuff. All these wild cards: Syria collapsing, Trump being elected, the EU is in complete disarray. Hungary is, at least for the next couple of months, is leading the EU temporarily. So, what do you see in terms of foreign policy from the Armenia standpoint, in terms of relationship with? We'll go in order of countries. So let's start with the United States, which is the most important.
Well, so far so good with Trump. I mean, it's there was this all the dictators in the world, including the ones next to us, were all they hoped they were praying for Trump to win because they think it's the world of impunity that comes back. But if you look at some of the people that Trump has appointed and the multiple meetings between Trump and the conversation, the one meeting and the multiple conversations between the prime minister and president-elect, I'm not sure if that atmosphere of impunity will actually be there. There's been a lot of work that's gone on with working with the Trump base and creating relationships both in the religious right and other people, and deepening Armenian-U.S. relations. So a Trump that is engaged, that essentially keeps what we have going right now, is not a bad thing for Armenia. And frankly, it is not like the Biden administration was in any way particularly favorable. I mean, it was under their watch that the genocide happened in Artsakh. So, and without them saying anything or doing anything.
Well, saying they wouldn't allow it and then doing nothing.
So it's so far so good when it comes with Trump, but we will see. Obviously, Trump is not just for our purposes, it's the way he deals with our neighboring countries that actually also has an effect. But the biggest thing with Trump is frankly uncertainty, is because this is not an administration or a person that runs something out of a general...
There's no doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, one day he's trying to buy Greenland, then he's trying to invade Panama. So it's going to be tumultuous, but those breaking of glasses of the U.S. political establishment are not necessarily always bad, because they do away with some of the sacred cows that the U.S. all the U.S. administrations abide by, and Trump might not abide by them. So far so good, but we will see.
Let's talk about Russia. Just recently, there's a big meeting in Moscow, and Prime Minister just announced as his closing act of the year that he's not going to be attending it. There's a lot of rumors going around if he was going to go, if he was going to have a one-on-one with Putin, and he just announced as of this morning that he's not going to be attending. What do you think the year 2025 is going to bring for us in terms of Armenian-Russian relations?
Armenian-Russian relations are in a slow, steady decline. And I think the key... And they're inevitable, just because of Russia could very well win the Ukraine war this year, but it could also not matter very much, because they've essentially lost the war in the first weeks that they launched it. When you look at the totality of what it means, the isolation of the country, the economic damage, and what it does,
the international prestige as the second world power is now
it's all dissipated. Yeah. So. I do not see Russia's relationship with almost every country that is declining, except with the country that's our neighboring country, which is, Baku, which is actually tying itself more and more to Russia, or actually cutting itself off from the West, more so. So I expect what we had this year, just more of a slide downward into oblivion. And that's what you really want. If you're actually switching sides, you do not want radical, unnecessary, provocative breaks. You want a slow disengagement, which is the natural order of things, because Russia itself is actually weakening in real terms when it comes to the totality. I mean, they might be getting one irrelevant village here or there in Ukraine a day, but that does not change the fate of the country.
What do you say to those who are under the impression that tomorrow Trump will negotiate some kind of deal, as if that's how negotiations even happen, but say for the sake of argument, in a single day the guns are going to go silent, and then Russia is just going to turn around and then just come and bulldoze through the Caucasus and reinvade us and bring us under their umbrella? What do you think?
I mean, they'll have a larger bandwidth, but you have to understand the political problems that a post-war Russia will have internally. People miss this, but the greatest threat and the criticisms on Putin right now actually come from the right. They don't come from the left. The left in Russia has left the country. It's the more nationalists, it's the more right-wing nationalists that are attacking him about, and you see this criticism actually growing into, we're not winning the war because of corruption, because of all these things, because of all these oligarchs having all these powers of stealing all the country's resources. A post-war Russia is going to have significant internal political problems, because at the end of the day, if sanctions aren't lifted, if Russia is still isolated from the world, and the $3,000 a month salaries go back to being $500, $600, $800 a month, that's when the problems really start. So that threat is obviously there, but Any way you look at it, you're dealing with a country that has less capacity on all fronts, both for good and for mischief.
Let's talk about Georgia, since it's linked to Russia at this point, the situation that's ongoing over there. And I do think it's an important lesson for us to look at. I mean, personally, I always remain as optimistic as possible. For us, the watershed moment with Russia, even if they were to supposedly turn around and reconquer us, we all saw the videos of the FSB leaving their positions 1 hour before the Azeris launched their attack on Jarmuk. And I don't think you can unsear that from the collective memory of the Armenian people. I think that was the watershed moment. And you can see with the Georgian people, the youth and so on, these ongoing massive protests that have no leadership. They're not guided by any opposition. They themselves are just refusing. So what do you think is going on there? What do you think the future looks like for Georgia and our relations with them?
I think our relations with them really don't change much. I think these issues are quite internal, because there's two scenarios. The current government gets overthrown and gets replaced by a far more pro-Western government,
which is good for us.
That's all very good for us. Yeah. Current government stays. The current government is going to be weak. It's going to be under pressure from the West, and will, in so many ways, need our good officers to keep relationships with the West. So they will not do anything that is detrimental. And let's just the 800-pound gorilla in the room is weapons deliveries. That's, outside of that, that's really the only thing that they can do that can be problematic for us.
They can withhold Sulunguni cheese deliveries as well. Yeah.
So it's I do not see Armenian-Georgian relations on the things that matter changing regardless of the government. I see it getting better if there's there's a new government. Yeah. But internally, this is really the make it or break it year for that country, because if the current government holds, they will hold power, and the development of the country will slow down. And you'll be dealing with a poorer Georgia as time goes on, and a less relevant Georgia in the world as time goes on. But if the changes do happen, you essentially go back to this tag team of pro-Western countries in the South Caucasus, which can dramatically change things. But we have no control over it. Who wins? I think in the long run, the people on the street win. But that can take years. I'm not sure if that essentially gets settled this year, because in all fairness, the current government does have a base. They have a much more significant base, for example, than the pre-revolutionary Armenian government did. Yeah. So it's not like they have no supporters. They might not be the attractive supporters. They might not be the young hipsters, but those old people in villages and small towns still vote, and they vote for their own reasons, for a government that they think will have good relations with Russia and won't have war. Yeah. So I'm not sure which side wins. In the long term, the people on the street will win, just because those are the trends in the world. But that could take years.
And what do you think of relations in 2025 with our lovely neighbor to the east, Azerbaijan? There's all this hubbub about a supposed peace agreement. We have nothing. We have only two clauses left that aren't agreed. They happen to be deal breaker clauses, but there's still only two clauses we haven't agreed on before we all sign a happy peace agreement.
Nothing.
What do you think?
No, at best, it's today's cold peace. At best, nothing is going to get signed. Period. Under any scenario. And by the way, people in this government know that. No matter what they say, they know that in private. Yeah. Nothing's going to get signed. At best, we have the cold peace that we have now. At worst, we'll have aggression. And then because the timeline for aggression is narrowing. So this in many ways is the most dangerous year. But nothing changes. Our issues... We need to see and understand our issues with them that are going to continue for decades, and deal with them in the terms that they're going to continue for decades. There's no magic solution. That country and that regime cannot survive in the long term without an Armenian enemy, period.
What about relations with our southern neighbor Iran, which has been essentially declawed by Israel in the last year? What's the future looking like?
I see more of the same as far as relations go. But if things get out of hand, there's an Israeli attack on Iran. There's a U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. I mean, Trump has this duality about him. He essentially ran as the anti-war president, but then he supports some of the most hawkish positions. I think at the end of the day, Trump, in his first term, had timelines or actually possibilities of attacking Iran, and he didn't. I think his base instinct is not to do that. But Netanyahu needs war. For him to survive, he needs war, and he could see this as a historic opportunity. But you attack a country like that, it can have entirely very different responses. It could be that the regime is so weak and so unpopular that this could actually trigger something against it. Or it could be Iranians are very nationalistic. No one likes their country attacked. It could have the exact opposite effect, where people say, the hell with politics, we're defending our country. And you saw some of that when the Israelis bombed, military positions in Iran, some of that already. So it's very hard to say, but it's really the most unpredictable thing and the place where you would likely have the biggest surprises this year.
And finally, what do you foresee in our negotiations with Turkey, our relations with Turkey? It seems like there's been a bit of a gust of fresh air in the last couple of months, at least. There seems to be a lot more communications and talks. In fact, the Prime Minister met with Erdogan this year. So what do you foresee happening?
Nothing.
Still no open border?
Nothing. If you listen to some of the Turkish rhetoric, it's very clear that they're not interested publicly. They are not interested in any more provocations by Azerbaijan, because they have their own agenda, they have their own dealings with the West that they want to improve in certain areas, and this is not something that they need. Now, will they not support them if they are involved in aggression? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But they're not cheering them on. That's very clear. But I don't think the decisions that we care about will be based on regime survival in Baku and what helps the regime live longest. And I'm not sure even Ankara has any say in that.
Thanks again, Eric, for hopping on the show. And as usual, we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks again for watching Civilnet. On behalf of the entire team, I want to wish you all happy holidays with your family, with your loved ones. Hopefully 2025 is going to be a better year, as I hope every year is a better year.